What is up, guys? Today's video, I'm going to be sharing my initial impressions of the 2022 Yamaha YZF R1M. Alright, so how this video is going to be panning out is I want to discuss how the bike performed in bone stock form, so everything before the modifications were applied. I want to shed some light on how it drove, what were some of its strengths, some of its weaknesses, and pretty much my overall thoughts on the Yamaha R1M. Alright, the very first thing that jumped out at me when I first saw this bike in person, sitting at the dealership, getting ready to pick it up, was the looks, man. It looks amazing in person. The camera's not gonna pick up every single little thing, but I mean, if you see this bike in person, it is definitely up there in the looks category. It is very comparable to my Panigale, and in my opinion, one of the best looking super bikes you can get in the market today. Just more on the looks aspect, this is one of the last bikes to have that classic super bike aesthetic appearance, because most of the modern super bikes now that are being released, I'm talking about the premium class leader bikes, most of them have wings, some sort of aerodynamic wings up on the front fairing. For instance, the Panigale AP4S, the Aprilia RSV4 1100 factory, the Honda CBR, now the BMW S1000 RR. You know, everybody's just following, trying to mimic the MotoGP bikes. I mean, it makes sense, it's a track bike, but this is one of the last super bikes to have, like I was saying, the standard look, that classic leader class look in today's modern world of super bikes. With that being said, I would definitely give the R1M a 10 out of 10 in the looks category. Again, it is very comparable to the Panigale V4S and looks even more amazing in person. All right, the next category we're going to discuss is ergonomics and comfort. So this is all going to depend on your body type, your rider height, your arm length, how long your legs are. Everything will be taken into account, and so I cannot really give you a general, is this bike comfortable or not? It really depends on how you feel about it. So my recommendation is definitely, if you can, test ride one, and if not, you absolutely have to sit on the R1, because this is one of the tallest bikes and most aggressive bikes I've ever owned. The seat height is extremely tall, it's wide on the back, and the handlebars are extremely low. So this is a race position, race ready, track ready super bike. Definitely, again, if you can, go ahead and test ride one. If you got a buddy who owns an R1, the R1 and R1M are exactly identical in terms of the frame, everything, except for obviously your Öhlins suspension. It's electronic on the R1M. Everything else, Biggest difference is the bodywork and the suspension on the M model, and the swing arm is different. But aside from that, everything is exact. Same amount of power, same engine internals, everything. So keep that in mind. With that being said, let's dive right into performance and technical specs on this R1M. Performance. It is a very scary bike. I've been riding since 2017, and out of all the super bikes I've ridden, this R1M has the most character, and it is definitely a wild horse to ride. So definitely take it slow. I ride in B mode when it was in stock form. A mode is just a straight animal. The throttle on this R1 is surprisingly very good. It is not twitchy out of the box. It is very compliant on the street. And again, with this R1M, you could tune the suspension settings at the flick of a switch. So it is adaptive. And I highly recommend, if you have the budget for it and you love to mainly do street riding, get this M model because of the Öhlins suspension, and obviously for track it is more than capable for your average rider. Continuing on with performance, this bike out of the crate sports 200 brake horsepower out of the crank. It's got titanium connecting rods, titanium headers, and a cross-plane motor. This is, I believe, the only super bike that has a cross-plane crankshaft. This is an inline 4. For those of you that don't know, and the sound is very comparable to the Aprilia RSV4 1100 factory. Speaking of sound, let's go ahead and start her up. Keys in the ignition. The startup screen is TFT display. Right now, let's see how many. 2,562 miles on the odometer in less than a month, so I love this bike. All right, let's start her up. The neighbors. It's kind of early in the morning, and I apologize if I've woken you up, but there you have it. This is a Krapovic titanium exhaust. Again, the headers are already titanium out of the crate. Both the R1M and the base R1 have titanium headers, so if you were ever wondering. All right, just to wrap up the performance piece of this bike, one of its biggest strengths is the handling characteristics. This bike is the most flickable leader bike I've ever owned. It is so lightweight when it gets going. even in low speeds and high speeds, at all levels of the spectrum, this bike is easy to throw around left and right. It is the most nimble 1000 class super bike I've ever owned, and I've been riding since 2017, and I got into the super bike arena since 2019. I've owned Panigale V4S, Apriliards V4 1100 factory, BMW S1000 RR, and some of the 600s I've ridden were the Yamaha R6 and the Kawasaki ZX6R. I've also ridden a ZX10. So out of all those bikes, this is hands down the most flickable and most precise. It is laser cut handling. I cannot reiterate the strength of this bike when it comes to just carving out lines, picking out lines, everything. It is insanely good. So you won't know until you ride one. Even the base R1, I am certain that it's more than capable. So definitely a 10 out of 10 in handling. All right. The brakes on the Contrast is one of its weaknesses, the only weakness I could find on this bike. But however, the brakes are not terrible. Initially, when you're braking in the bike, it feels like it's spongy, it doesn't work, but you put a couple hundred miles on it, at least 500 miles, and it is more than capable on the street. On track riding, I haven't tracked this bike, but judging from what the journalists have been saying and have been reviewing, the brakes on this could be better. They are not Brembo compared to the other premium leader class super bikes, and that is its downside. The brake master cylinder is Nissan. I have no complaints on this brake master cylinder, and if you ever want to, obviously you can swap out the brake system for Brembo. However, let me reiterate, this bike is more than capable. Its stopping power, it's pretty good. So brakes, I would say, will get an 8 out of 10. All right, electronics on this bike. I'm not gonna dive deep into this. I'm not gonna compare it with the Panigale V4S because I am not a race rider, track rider, compared to some of the journalists out there who eat, ride, and sleep track, if that makes sense. So, however, I will say that the electronics on this is very capable. It's safe, and it's not too intrusive. It's got all the bells and whistles like the Panigale V4S. For instance, it's got traction control, ABS, wheelie control, slide control, launch control, and cornering ABS as well. Slide control, I know I've mentioned that. So those are the electronic aids that will definitely help you when you're pushing the bike to its limits. So obviously you're not going to do that in the street, and if you are, I would reevaluate your life and recommend you doing track days. In any case, that's electronics for you. All right, the very last thing I want to talk about in terms of performance is the acceleration. Now, this bike is the reigning world champion in the World Superbike arena, that and the ZX10 RR. So, and I could tell why, and the reason is the acceleration. low end and mid-range power on this bike is ridiculous. It is very comparable to the S1000. And again, if you've ridden or owned an S1000, you know what I'm talking about. The bike is insanely fast out of the crate. Words cannot describe my feeling towards the amount of power this thing outputs from the get-go. It just accelerates like a freaking rocket ship. So yes, 10 out of 10 on acceleration. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up my initial impressions video on this 2022 YZF R1M. Now the grand question is, should you get this over the base model? And I highly recommend yes. If you have the money to do so, I would definitely do it, because the Öhlins electronically adaptive suspension is perfect for the street. If you're gonna be solely a track rider, barely any street miles, get the base, and you could deck it out with Öhlins suspension later when your skill level is at that level where you're chasing lap times, tenths and hundreds of a second matter to you. But either or, I mean, both bikes on track are more than capable, and for your average rider, you will hardly notice the difference. It becomes more of a significant difference when you're a very experienced track rider, and like I said, you're chasing lap times and you're riding competitively. But again, your average Joe like me, street rider, this is the bike to get, the R1M. And let me tell you why. The biggest thing I would hit you is reliability. The Japanese bikes, out of all of the bikes I've owned, the Japanese bikes is very, very reliable. Like, there's not a single issue I've ran into when I've owned Japanese, especially the Yamahas. The Yamahas are really good with that. The engines are real good. Obviously, take care of your bike. Don't neglect it. Do your proper service and maintenance. And this thing will last you a very long time. So if you rack up a ton of miles like me, this is it. Don't even look at Italian, because Italian does get expensive. Take it from me, I've had the Aprilia's V4 factory and the BMW S1000RR. Both bikes were not reliable at all. Hence, I don't own them anymore. The Ducati, on the other hand, I've never had a single issue with that, and that bike is approaching 20,000 miles. I'm an all-season rider, and take it from my experience, definitely Japanese is the way to go. No matter what anybody tells you, you will never go wrong with Japanese bikes. With that being said, I hope this video helps you out, and I hope that you make an informed decision on which super bike to pick up next. But out of all of the bikes I've ridden, again, the biggest takeaways for this R1M 2022 is reliability, performance, looks, the low cost at maintaining this bike, and fun factor. This is the most fun super bike. This is the most fun I've ever had, bottom line. So keep that in mind, and that's it. Thanks for watching. Merry Christmas, and always ride safe. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.